The stagecoach lurched to a stop, wheels grinding against the sun-baked earth of New Mexico territory. Clara Monroe pressed a gloved hand to the window, peering through the dust-covered glass at the desolate landscape that would become her refuge, or perhaps her purgatory. "Dry Hollow, ma'am," the driver called down, his voice rough as the terrain they'd crossed. "End of the line." Clara gathered her worn carpetbag and stepped down from the coach, her black morning dress immediately catching the relentless desert wind. The fabric whipped around her ankles as she stood in the middle of what passed for a main street, little more than a collection of weathered buildings huddled against the vastness of the high desert. The year was 1883, and she had traveled far from the ashes of Nebraska, from the convent where she'd spent a year in silence, learning to live with memories that scorched worse than any prairie fire. Sister Catherine had arranged this position through her brother, a traveling preacher who knew of a rancher in need of help. Sometimes, the old nun had said, "The only way forward is to keep moving west until you run out of land." Clara shielded her eyes against the afternoon glare, searching for someone who might be Elias Hartley. The letter had been brief, businesslike. "We'll meet stage on 15th. Look for man with bay horse. E. Hartley." She spotted him before he moved, a tall figure leaning against a hitching post, hat pulled low, watching her with the stillness of a man who'd learned patience from the desert itself. His clothes were practical, dust-colored, blending with the landscape as if he were part of it. When he finally pushed away from the post and approached, his movements were economical, deliberate. "Miss Monroe." It wasn't a question. His voice carried the same sparse quality as his letter. "Mr. Hartley." She inclined her head, grateful for the formality that created distance between strangers. He reached for her bag without asking, his hands scarred and capable. Clara noticed he wore no wedding band, though she knew from the preacher that he was a widower. She touched her own bare ring finger unconsciously, a gesture that had become habit in the year since the fire. "Wagons this way," he said. "Already turning." The ride to his ranch took them through country that seemed to exist at the edge of the world. Red mesas rose like ancient fortresses against a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The wind carried the scent of sage and something else, a wildness that made Clara's chest tighten with memory. She'd known wild country before, in Nebraska, before it all burned. Elias Hartley didn't speak during the journey, and Clara was grateful. She studied him from beneath her bonnet, taking in the lines etched deep around his eyes, the way his hands held the reins with easy competence. He couldn't be more than 35, but something in his bearing suggested a man who'd lived several lifetimes already. The war. Perhaps. The preacher had mentioned he was a veteran. The ranch, when it finally appeared, was modest. A low adobe house with a pitched roof, a barn that had seen better days, a well with a windmill that creaked in the constant wind. It sat in a valley between two ridges, protected but isolated. The nearest neighbor, she'd been told, was 5 miles east. "You'll stay there," Elias said, pointing to a small structure beside the barn. "Used to be the foreman's quarters. It's clean. Has everything you need." Clara nodded, understanding the arrangement. She hadn't come here as a bride. Despite what the gossips in town might assume, she'd come for work, for the blessed distraction of labor, for a place where no one knew her name or what she'd lost. He helped her down from the wagon, his touch brief and impersonal. "Dinner's at sunset, breakfast at dawn. You'll cook, clean, mend what needs mending, care for the horses when I'm gone. $20 a month, room and board included." "Yes, Mr. Hartley." He paused, seeming to consider something. "I keep to myself, mostly. I expect you'll do the same." "That suits me perfectly." Something flickered in his gray eyes. Recognition, perhaps, of a kindred spirit in solitude. Then he turned away, leading the horses to the barn. Clara carried her few possessions to the small adobe structure. Inside, she found it exactly as he'd said, clean, sparse, functional. A narrow bed with a faded quilt, a washstand, a small table with one chair, a window faced east, away from the main house. She unpacked slowly. 2 dresses, undergarments, her mother's Bible, a silver brush that had somehow survived the fire. As the sun began its descent toward the western ridge, painting the desert in shades of copper and gold, Clara made her way to the main house. The kitchen was larger than she'd expected, well stocked if dusty from disuse. She found salt pork, beans, flour, dried chilies hanging from the vigas. Working by instinct and memory, she prepared a simple meal, her hands remembering the motions even when her mind wanted to drift. Elias appeared exactly at sunset, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. He washed at the pump outside before taking his seat at the table. They ate in silence, the only sounds the clink of forks on tin plates and the wind testing the windows. When he finished, he nodded once, approval, she supposed, and retreated to the main room. Later, as Clara cleaned the dishes, she heard it, the lonely sound of a harmonica drifting through the evening air. The melody was slow, mournful, speaking of losses too deep for words. She stood still, hands in the cooling dishwater, and listened. When the music finally faded, she found her cheeks wet with tears she hadn't meant to shed. The days fell into a rhythm as predictable as the desert sun. Clara rose before dawn to start the coffee and biscuits. Elias would appear, eat quickly, and disappear to tend the small herd of cattle that grazed the sparse grassland beyond the ridges. She would clean, mend, tend the kitchen garden that struggled against the arid soil. In the evenings, she'd prepare supper. They'd eat in their accustomed silence, and then she'd retire to her quarters while he remained in the house. Sometimes she'd catch him watching her, when she hung laundry on the line, when she drew water from the well, when she sat on her doorstep in the evening, reading by the last light. His gaze wasn't improper, merely observant, as if she were a puzzle he was trying to solve without getting too close. The first time their routine broke was nearly 2 weeks after her arrival. Clara had been mucking out the horse stalls, a task she'd taken on without being asked. The bay mare, Rosalie, was gentle and seemed to appreciate the attention. Clara was humming softly, a hymn from childhood, when she sensed Elias behind her. "You know horses," he said. She continued brushing Rosalie's coat. "My husband kept them before." The words came out steady, matter of fact. She'd learned to speak of the dead without her voice breaking. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Rosalie was my wife's mare." Clara's hand stilled on the brush. She turned to look at him, seeing for the first time the raw edge of his own grief. "She's a fine animal. Sarah used to race her against the Mexican vaqueros. Always won." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, then vanished. "That was before." Before. Such a small word to carry such weight. He left her then, but something had shifted between them. An acknowledgement, perhaps, that they were both citizens of that country called grief, speaking its difficult language. One night, a sandstorm rolled in from the west. Clara had seen storms in Nebraska, rain and hail and tornadoes that could erase a farm in minutes. But this was different. The wind howled like a living thing, driving sand through every crack and crevice. Her little room shook with each gust. She lay in her narrow bed, trying not to think of another night, another wind, the smell of smoke and the sound of timber cracking. Her hands clenched the quilt as the storm raged outside. Through her window, she could barely make out the main house, its windows glowing faintly with lamplight. A particularly vicious gust shook her door, and suddenly she couldn't breathe. The walls seemed to close in, the air thick with memory and sand. She stumbled from bed, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders, and stepped out into the storm. The wind nearly knocked her down. Sand stung her face, filled her mouth when she tried to call out. She couldn't see, couldn't think, could only feel the panic rising in her throat like smoke. Strong hands caught her arms. Elias had appeared from the swirling darkness, his own face wrapped against the storm. Without a word, he pulled her against him and half carried, half dragged her toward the main house. They tumbled through the door together, gasping. "What in God's name were you doing?" he demanded, pulling the cloth from his face. His gray eyes were wild with something that might have been fear. Clara couldn't answer. She stood shaking in his kitchen, sand in her hair, her nightgown, her teeth. The storm hammered at the windows, and all she could see was flame. All she could smell was burning. Elias must have seen something in her face because his expression softened. "Sit," he said, guiding her to a chair by the stove. He disappeared briefly, returning with a blanket that he wrapped around her shoulders. Then he busied himself making coffee, not speaking, letting her compose herself. When he finally set a mug before her, his hand briefly covered hers on the table. The touch lasted only a moment, but it anchored her to the present, to this kitchen, this storm, this man who understood the weight of memory. They sat together as the storm raged, not speaking, not needing to, when the worst had passed and dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. Clara rose to return to her quarters. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded, already turning away, but she'd seen something in his eyes, a recognition, perhaps, that in saving her from the storm, he'd allowed her closer than he'd intended. From that night forward, the door to the main house would remain unlocked, though she would not cross its threshold again for many weeks. The sound that woke her came 3 nights later. At first, she thought it was the wind again, but the night was still. Then she heard it more clearly. A name called out in anguish from the main house. "Margaret! No, Margaret!" Clara lay still, her heart aching for the pain in that voice. So that was his ghost's name. Margaret. She wondered if Elias knew he called for his dead wife in his sleep, if he remembered the dreams when morning came. She rose and went to her window, looking across at the house. His window was dark. The nightmare passed, but she stood watching for a long time, thinking of the names we carry, the ones we call out in the darkness, the ones we can never let go. In the morning, Elias seemed more withdrawn than usual. He left early, before she'd finished making breakfast, and didn't return until well after dark. Clara ate alone, saved his portion warming on the stove, and tried not to think about the loneliness that pressed against the windows like a living thing. This was what she'd wanted, she reminded herself. Distance, solitude, a place to hide from the world and its questions. But as she heard his footsteps on the porch, heard him pause at the door before entering, she wondered if 2 people could share a solitude without it becoming something else entirely. When he finally came in, she served his meal without comment, but as she turned to go, he spoke. "I'm sorry if I disturbed your sleep." She paused, her back to him. "We all have our ghosts. Mr. Hartley." "Elias," he said quietly. "If we're to speak of ghosts, you might as well call me Elias." Clara nodded, still not turning. "Good night, Elias. Good night, Clara." Her name and his voice followed her back to her quarters, where she lay awake thinking of all the ways a person could be haunted, and all the ways they might, perhaps, find peace. The weeks passed like clouds across the desert sky, slowly, almost imperceptibly changing the landscape of their shared solitude. Clara found herself watching for Elias's return each evening, listening for the sound of his horse's hooves on the hard-packed earth. She told herself it was merely the rhythm of routine, nothing more. But routine couldn't explain the way her pulse quickened when he lingered over coffee in the morning, or how she found herself taking extra care with the biscuits when she noticed he favored them with honey. Small things, dangerous things. The accident happened on a Tuesday, washing day. Clara had strung lines between the house and the barn for the laundry, taking advantage of the fierce sun and dry wind. She was reaching for the last shirt in her basket when her foot caught on a stone. The world tilted, and she fell hard, her ankle twisting beneath her. The pain was sharp, immediate. She sat in the dirt, tears pricking her eyes, feeling foolish and helpless. The wet shirt lay beside her, already collecting dust. "Clara!" She hadn't heard him approach. Elias stood over her, his face creased with concern. He must have been working nearby, must have seen her fall. "I'm fine," she said quickly, attempting to rise. The moment she put weight on her ankle, she gasped. "You're not fine." Without hesitation, he knelt beside her, his hands gentle as he examined her ankle through her boot. "Can you move it?" She tried, wincing. "Yes," But it's not broken, then likely just twisted. He looked up at her, and for a moment she was caught by the intensity of his gray eyes. I'm going to carry you inside. That's not necessary. But he was already sliding one arm beneath her knees, the other around her back. He lifted her as easily as if she weighed nothing. And suddenly Clara found herself held against his chest, aware of the solid strength of him, the scent of leather and sage and honest work. Put your arms around my neck, he instructed quietly. It'll be easier. She obeyed, her face burning with more than the desert sun. He carried her not to her quarters but to the main house, kicking open the door with his boot. Inside. He settled her carefully in a chair and knelt again to unlace her boot. This may hurt, he warned, easing the boot off. Clara bit her lip to keep from crying out. Her ankle was already swelling, angry and red. Wait here. He disappeared into another room, returning with strips of clean cloth and a basin of cool water, with surprising gentleness. He bathed her ankle, then began wrapping it firmly with the cloth. You've done this before, she observed, needing something to focus on besides his hands on her skin. Cattle aren't the only things that get injured on a ranch. He tied off the bandage, then sat back on his heels. You'll need to stay off it for a few days. I have work. The work will keep. His tone brooked no argument. You'll stay here tonight. That cot in your quarters is too narrow, and you'll need to elevate this. Clara opened her mouth to protest, then closed it. There was something in his face, not just concern, but a need to help, to fix what was broken. She recognized it because she'd seen it in herself, the desperate desire to be useful when everything else felt beyond control. All right, she said softly. He helped her to the bedroom, his bedroom. She realized with a start. The room was sparse, military in its neatness, a bed with an iron frame, a washstand, a trunk at the foot of the bed. On the small table beside the bed sat a photograph in a silver frame, turned face down. I'll sleep in the other room, he said, helping her onto the bed. He arranged pillows behind her and under her injured ankle with the same careful attention he'd shown while bandaging it. Elias, she wasn't sure what she wanted to say. Thank you seemed inadequate. Rest, he said. I'll bring supper later. He left her there, surrounded by the subtle evidence of his life. She could smell him on the pillows. That mixture of outdoor work and something uniquely his, despite herself. She found it comforting. When he returned with a tray of food, beans and cornbread. Simple but filling, he pulled a chair beside the bed rather than leaving immediately. You should eat too, Clara said. He shook his head. Already did. They sat in companionable silence while she ate. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the walls of the room in shades of gold and rose. Finally, Clara gathered her courage. Tell me about her, Margaret. Elias went very still. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he reached for the overturned photograph, holding it in his hands without looking at it. We were married 7 years, he said quietly. Met her at a dance in Santa Fe. She was lively, full of laughter. Nothing like... He stopped, jaw tightening. Nothing like the desert. Clara supplied gently. He nodded. She made this place bearable. Made it home. His thumb traced the edge of the frame. We were expecting a child when the dispute started. Border issues with the Maddox clan. They claimed our water rights. Said the previous owner had promised them access. Clara waited, sensing the weight of what was coming. I was in town when they came, 20 miles away, buying supplies. His voice had gone flat, emotionless. They didn't mean for it to happen, they said later, just wanted to scare her into leaving. But Margaret, she was stubborn, wouldn't be run off her own land. Elias, you don't have to. They shot her on the porch. The words came out harsh, raw. She bled out before I got home. Her and the baby both. Clara's eyes burned with unshed tears. She reached out, covering his hand with hers where it gripped the photograph. He didn't pull away. The law said it was an accident, said there wasn't enough evidence to prove intent. The Maddox boys left the territory after that, but it didn't matter. Nothing mattered. They sat in the deepening darkness, hands touching, sharing the weight of loss. Finally, Elias turned the photograph over. Even in the dim light, Clara could see Margaret had been beautiful, dark-haired, smiling, radiantly alive. "She would have liked you," he said unexpectedly. "She always said I needed someone who wouldn't let me brood. Do I not let you brood?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You're here, aren't you? In my house, in my bed." Margaret would say that's progress. Heat flooded Clara's cheeks. But before she could respond, he was standing, tucking the photograph into his shirt pocket. "Sleep," he said. "I'll check on you in the morning." He left her there, and Clara lay in his bed thinking about the strange intimacy of shared grief, how it could bring two people closer than any proper courtship. She thought about her own ghosts, Samuel's face in the firelight, little Anna's laughter silenced forever. Tomorrow, perhaps, she would tell Elias her own story. Tonight, it was enough to lie in sheets that smelled of him and feel, for the first time in 2 years, not entirely alone. The next morning, she woke to find him sitting in the chair beside the bed, fully dressed, watching her with an unreadable expression. "How long have you been there?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious of her unpinned hair, her rumpled nightgown. "Not long." He leaned forward to examine her ankle, his touch clinical now. "Careful. Swelling's down some. Good. I should get back to work." "No." The word was firm. "Another day at least. I've managed before you came. I can manage one more day. But the laundry is already done." She stared at him. "You did the laundry?" That almost smile again. "I've been a bachelor longer than you think. A man learns or goes naked." The image of Elias doing laundry, this taciturn rancher wrestling with wet sheets, made something warm bloom in Clara's chest. "Thank you," she said softly. He stood abruptly, as if her gratitude made him uncomfortable. "I'll bring breakfast." The day passed strangely, with their roles reversed. Elias brought her meals, checked her bandages, even carried her to the porch in the afternoon so she could sit in the fresh air. He worked within sight of the house, and several times Clara caught him glancing her way, as if assuring himself she was still there. By evening, she insisted on hobbling to the kitchen to cook supper. He supported her with an arm around her waist, and she tried not to think about how natural it felt to lean against him. "You're stubborn," he said as she lowered herself onto a kitchen chair. "Pot and kettle," she replied, making him actually chuckle, a rusty sound, as if he'd forgotten how. She made a simple stew with the rabbit he'd caught that morning, and they ate together at the kitchen table like an old married couple. The thought should have alarmed her. Instead, it brought a strange peace. "I lost my husband and daughter in a fire," she said suddenly, surprising herself. 2 years ago this November." Elias's spoon stilled. He waited. Sam had been drinking. He often did toward the end. Knocked over a lantern in the barn. She stared at her hands. Anna was playing in the loft. She loved to hide there among the hay bales. By the time I realized, "Clara," his voice was rough. "I tried to get to them. But the smoke, the heat." She touched her chest unconsciously, where the scars still marked her skin. "Someone pulled me out. I don't even remember who. When I woke up, they were both gone." "It wasn't your fault." She looked up at him then, seeing her own guilt reflected in his eyes. "Wasn't it? I should have watched her better. Should have stopped Sam from drinking. Should have been God," Elias interrupted gently. With power over life and death, the words hung between them, applicable to both their losses. Clara felt tears sliding down her cheeks, didn't bother to wipe them away. Elias stood and came around the table. Without speaking, he pulled her against him, letting her cry into his shirt. His hand stroked her hair with infinite gentleness, and she could feel his own breathing unsteady against her. How long they stayed like that, she didn't know, but when she finally pulled back, something had shifted irreversibly between them. They had crossed a line, stepped into dangerous territory where comfort became something else, where loneliness sought its own cure. "I should go back to my quarters," she whispered. "Your ankle?" "Is well enough." She needed distance, needed to think. This was moving too fast, becoming too much. He helped her back to her small room, both of them careful not to touch more than necessary. At her door, he paused. "Clara, He stopped, shook his head. "Good night." She watched him walk back to the main house, his shoulders bent as if carrying a great weight. Inside her room, she sat on her narrow bed and tried to make sense of what was happening. She had promised herself never to love again, never to risk that kind of loss. But promises, she was learning, were fragile things in the desert. They could be worn away by wind and time and the patient persistence of a man who understood grief as intimately as she did. Outside, she heard the first notes of his harmonica, but tonight the melody was different. Still melancholy, yes, but with something else woven through it, a tentative hope, as fragile as spring rain in the desert, but unmistakably there. Clara lay down, her ankle throbbing, her heart even more so. Tomorrow, she would rebuild the walls between them. Tomorrow, she would remember why she came here, for work, for solitude, for forgetting. Tonight, though, she let the music wash over her and imagined, just for a moment, what it might be like to allow herself to feel again. The thought terrified her. It also, God help her, made her feel alive for the first time in 2 years. The desert spring arrived suddenly, transforming the harsh landscape with unexpected beauty. Wildflowers bloomed in defiant patches of color. Indian paintbrush, desert marigolds, purple lupines that seemed to appear overnight. Clara found herself spending more time in the garden, coaxing life from the stubborn soil, aware always of Elias watching from wherever he worked. They had fallen into a new rhythm since her injury. The careful distance she'd tried to maintain had eroded like sandstone in water, worn away by small kindnesses and shared silences. He would appear at unexpected moments, to help her carry water from the well, to mend a fence she was struggling with, to leave fresh game on her doorstep without comment. She, in turn, found herself taking more care with his meals, mending his shirts with tiny, perfect stitches, leaving coffee warming on the stove when she knew he'd been up all night with a sick calf. They were dancing around something neither dared name, but the whole ranch seemed to hum with unspoken possibility. The fever came on a Wednesday evening, swift and vicious as a summer storm. Clara had felt unwell all day, a heaviness in her limbs she'd attributed to the heat, but as she prepared supper, the kitchen began to swim before her eyes. The last thing she remembered was reaching for the table to steady herself, missing, and falling into darkness. She woke to coolness on her burning skin, gentle hands bathing her face with a damp cloth. Elias's face swam into focus above her, etched with worry. "There you are," he murmured. "You scared me." She tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. He lifted her head carefully, helped her sip water from a tin cup. She was in his bed again, she realized, wearing only her shift, covered by a light sheet. "How long?" she managed to whisper. 2 days. The fever broke this morning, but you've been drifting in and out. 2 days. She'd been insensible for 2 days while you've been caring for me." Color touched his weathered cheeks. "Wasn't going to let you burn up alone in that shed. Mrs. Martinez from the neighboring ranch came by yesterday. Helped with the necessities. But mostly it's been me." Clara closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the intimacy of it. This reserved man who'd kept his distance so carefully had spent 2 days nursing her through fever, bathing her heated skin, sitting vigil through the dangerous nights. "Why?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "Because I couldn't lose you, too. Not when I've just started to—" He stopped, jaw clenching. "Started to what?" she pressed gently. Instead of answering with words, he took her hand in both of his, cradling it like something precious. His thumbs traced the calluses on her palm, the burns that had never quite healed straight. To live again, he finished quietly. You make me want to live again. Clara. Tears slipped down her cheeks. Elias. I know you didn't come here for this. I know you have your own grief, your own reasons for wanting to be alone, but these months with you. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressed a kiss to her palm that sent heat through her that had nothing to do with fever. I'm asking you to stay, not as my housekeeper, as more. I'm afraid, she admitted, the words scraping her raw throat. I can't survive losing someone again. Neither can I, he said simply. But maybe that's why we understand each other. Maybe that's why this could work. She studied his face. This man who'd become essential to her without her noticing, like breath or heartbeat. Saw her own fear reflected there, but also hope, fragile and stubborn as the flowers blooming in the desert. All right, she whispered. Something blazed in his gray eyes. He leaned down, and she thought he might kiss her, but he simply pressed his forehead to hers, breathing her in. Sleep now, he said. We have time. When she woke next, it was deep night. The fever had truly broken, leaving her weak but clear-headed. Elias was asleep in the chair beside the bed, one hand still holding hers, his head tipped back at an uncomfortable angle. She studied him in the moonlight, the silver threading through his dark hair, the lines that grief and sun had carved into his face, the surprising gentleness of his mouth in sleep. This was what she was choosing. Then, not the young love she'd had with Samuel, all fire and recklessness. This was something deeper, earned through loss and loneliness and the courage to try again. Unable to help herself, she reached out with her free hand and touched his face. He woke instantly, alert in the way of men who'd known danger. Clara, are you well? Do you need— Just you, she said softly. I just need you. He went very still. Then, moving carefully as if she might spook, he shifted from the chair to sit on the edge of the bed. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone. Are you certain? For answer, she drew him down to her. The kiss was tentative at first, a question asked and answered, then deeper, carrying all the longing of their months of careful distance. When they broke apart, both were breathing unsteadily. When you're well, he said roughly, I want to do this proper, court you as you deserve. And if I said I don't need courting, that I know my own mind, then I'd say you're still fever-addled and need more rest. But he was smiling as he said it, that rare, transformative expression that made him look years younger. He kissed her again, softly, then returned to his chair. Sleep? I'll be here. You need proper rest too, she protested. That chair can't be comfortable. I've slept in worse places. During the war. He stopped, shook his head. That's a story for another time. I want all your stories. Clara said, Eventually. And you'll have them. We have time, remember? She drifted back to sleep, holding onto those words like a promise. The recovery was slow but steady. Each day Clara grew stronger, able to stay awake longer, to take simple meals. Elias had moved her things from the shed to the main house without asking, setting them up in the small room that had stood empty. Just until you're fully well, he said, but they both knew it for the fiction it was. The first day she was able to walk to the porch unassisted. She found he'd built something new, a porch swing hanging from the rafters, wide enough for two. When did you do this? She asked, running her hand over the smooth wood. Those nights you were fevered, couldn't sleep, needed something to do with my hands. He helped her sit, then surprised her by settling beside her, setting the swing in gentle motion. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the mesas in shades of rose and gold. A roadrunner darted across the yard, chasing some invisible prey. The windmill creaked its endless song. The town will talk, Clara said eventually. An unmarried woman living in your house. Let them talk. His arm came around her shoulders, drawing her against his side. Though if it bothers you, we could make it proper. Reverend Blake makes his circuit through here next month. Clara's heart stuttered. Is that a proposal? Elias Hartley? A poor one, I grant you." He turned to face her fully. "I had thought to wait, to give you time to be sure, but if I've learned anything, it's that time isn't promised to anyone. So yes, Clara Monroe, I'm asking if you'll marry me. Not because of what people might say, but because I wake up looking for you and fall asleep thinking of you. Because you've brought life back to this place, and to me, because I love you, though I never thought to love again." Clara touched his face, feeling the wetness on her own cheeks. "I never thought to love again either. I promised myself I wouldn't, but you've been so patient, so gentle, wearing down my defenses like water on stone. Is that a yes?" "That's a yes." He kissed her then, deep and sure, and the sunset seemed to burn brighter for it. When they finally drew apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "I should warn you," he said. "I'm set in my ways, stubborn. I brew too much, work too hard, and sometimes forget to come in for meals." "And I should warn you," she replied, "that I have nightmares sometimes. I can be too independent for my own good, and I've been known to rearrange furniture without asking." "I've noticed that last one," he said dryly. "You've moved that kitchen table 3 times since you arrived." 4 times. Actually, you missed one." He laughed, a full, rich sound she'd never heard from him before. It transformed his whole face, and Clara found herself laughing too, joy bubbling up from some deep well she'd thought permanently dry. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they sat together on the swing he'd built during her illness, planning a quiet future. They would write to Reverend Blake. Clara would plant more flowers, Margaret's roses, she thought, from the bushes that still struggled by the well. They would buy more cattle, maybe some chickens, simple dreams, but precious for their ordinariness. "I want you to know," Elias said quietly, "that I don't expect you to replace her. What we have, it's different, its own thing, and you're not Samuel." Clara replied, "I'm not looking for what I had before. That belonged to who I was then. This, us, belongs to who we are now." He kissed her temple, a gesture so tender it made her throat tight. "Who we are now," he repeated. "I like that," as if by mutual agreement. They rose and went inside. At the door to her room, their home now. Truly, Elias paused. "Good night, Clara. Sweet dreams." "And you," she said, though she wanted to invite him in, to chase away the loneliness of 2 years with the warmth of his presence. But they had time now, time to do things properly, to build something lasting on the foundation of their shared understanding. Still, she couldn't resist drawing him down for one more kiss, slow and full of promise. When they parted, his eyes were dark with want, but he stepped back, ever the gentleman. "Soon," he said roughly. "Soon," she agreed. That night, for the first time since the fire, Clara slept without dreams, safe in the knowledge that when morning came, Elias would be there. Not a replacement for what she'd lost, but something new, something wholly theirs. A second chance at love, hard-won and all the more precious for the winning. The desert wind sang around the corners of the house, and somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called to its mate. But inside, all was warmth and quiet promise. 2 wounded hearts learning to beat as one. The letter from Reverend Blake arrived on a Tuesday, promising to pass through Dry Hollow in 3 weeks' time. Clara tucked it carefully into her apron pocket, a tangible reminder that her new life with Elias would soon be blessed and official. They had already begun living as a couple in all but law, sharing meals and evening conversations, though maintaining separate bedrooms out of propriety. It was market day, and Elias had suggested she accompany him to town for supplies. "Might as well let folks get used to seeing us together," he'd said with that dry practicality she'd grown to love. The ride to town was pleasant, the late spring air warm but not yet carrying summer's punishing heat. Clara wore her better dress, the blue calico that brought out her eyes, and had pinned her hair up carefully beneath her bonnet, beside her on the wagon seat. Elias seemed unusually tense, his jaw set as they approached the outskirts of Dry Hollow. "We don't have to do this." Clara said softly. If you'd rather wait. No. His hand found hers briefly. I'm not ashamed of us. Clara, let them talk if they must. And talk they did. Clara felt the eyes following them as Elias helped her down from the wagon in front of Henderson's general store. Whispers trailed in their wake like dust. That's her, the one living out at the Hartley place. Heard she came from Nebraska, some scandal there. Poor Margaret barely cold in her grave. Elias's face had gone stony, but Clara lifted her chin and took his arm properly. The grain first? She suggested calmly, as if she couldn't hear the gossip swirling around them. Inside Henderson's, Mrs. Henderson, a thin woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, barely acknowledged Clara's greeting. As they gathered supplies, Clara noticed how conversation stopped when she passed, how the other women drew back their skirts as if proximity to her might be contaminating. 3 pounds of flour, Clara requested evenly. And a pound of coffee, please. Mrs. Henderson measured out the goods in stiff silence. It wasn't until Elias stepped away to examine a new bridle that the woman leaned across the counter. You should be ashamed, she hissed, taking advantage of a grieving man's loneliness. We all know what kind of woman comes west alone, looking for work in a bachelor's house. Heat flooded Clara's cheeks, but before she could respond, another voice cut through the store. And what kind of woman would that be? Gladys? Mrs. Martinez, the rancher's wife who had helped during Clara's fever, swept forward like an avenging angel in homespun. She was a formidable woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked black hair and eyes that could strip bark from a tree. Senora Martinez. Mrs. Henderson stammered. You were just forgetting your Christian charity, I think. Mrs. Martinez placed a protective hand on Clara's arm. This young woman nursed her husband and child through their final hours, sat vigil in a burning house trying to save them. She came west not to hunt for a husband but to find peace. That she and Senor Hartley have found comfort in each other should be celebrated, not whispered about like scandal. The store had gone silent. Clara felt tears prick her eyes at this unexpected defense from a woman she barely knew. How did you... she began. Elias told me while you were fevered. Mrs. Martinez said gently. He wanted someone to know your true story. In case. She didn't finish, but Clara understood. In case she had died. Elias wanted someone to know who she really was. Mrs. Henderson had the grace to look ashamed, busying herself with wrapping their purchases. When Elias returned, he took one look at Clara's face and Mrs. Martinez's protective stance in his own face darkened. Is there a problem? His voice carried the quiet authority of a man who had led soldiers in battle. No problem at all, Mrs. Martinez said brightly. I was just inviting Clara to tea next week. We ranchers' wives must stick together. Sigh, outside the store. Elias helped both women into the wagon. Thank you, he said quietly to Mrs. Martinez. She patted his hand. You take care of each other. The rest will sort itself out. As they drove away, Clara saw Mrs. Martinez still standing guard in front of the store, daring anyone to speak ill of them in her presence. I'm sorry, Elias said once they were out of town. I should have warned you it might be difficult. I've weathered worse storms than small-town gossip. Clara replied, though her hands were still shaking slightly. Besides, it seems we have at least one ally. Rosa Martinez is a force of nature. He agreed. Her husband fought with me in the war. Good people. They rode in silence for a while, the town falling away behind them. Then Elias spoke again, his voice carefully controlled. What she said in there, about you trying to save them. Is that true? Clara closed her eyes. Yes. I went back into the house. Foolish, I know. But I could hear Anna crying, and I thought if I could just reach her. It wasn't foolish. His hand covered hers where they lay clenched in her lap. It was brave. It was useless. They were already gone. The smoke, the heat. I just refused to believe it. Clara. He pulled the wagon to a stop, turning to face her fully. You love them enough to risk everything trying to save them. That's not foolish. That's the kind of love that... He paused, seeming to gather himself. It's the kind of love I see in you every day. The kind that makes me grateful you're choosing to risk your heart again with me. She was crying now, unable to stop the tears. What if I lose you too? What if... Then you'll survive it, he said firmly, just as you survived before. But Clara, what if you don't lose me? What if we have 30 years together, 40? What if we grow old and cranky together, sitting on that porch swing and arguing about whose turn it is to feed the chickens? Despite her tears, Clara found herself laughing. We don't have chickens. We'll get some, mean ones that chase me around the yard while you laugh. She leaned into him, letting him hold her there on the open road. I love you, she whispered. I didn't think I'd ever say those words again. And I love you, he replied, more than I have words for. They were interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. A rider was coming fast from the direction of town, and Elias tensed, his hand moving instinctively to the rifle beneath the seat. But it was only young Tommy Martinez, Rosa's nephew. Senor Hartley, Mama sent me to warn you. There's a stranger in town asking questions about your lady. Says he knows her from Nebraska. Clara's blood turned to ice. Beside her, Elias had gone very still. What kind of stranger? He asked carefully. Fancy dresser, gambler type. Said his name was... The boy screwed up his face, trying to remember. Monroe, Silas Monroe. Said he was looking for his sister-in-law. The world seemed to tilt. Clara gripped the wagon seat, her knuckles white. Silas was dead. He had to be dead. She'd seen the barn collapse, had heard the screams. Clara? Elias's voice seemed to come from very far away. Clara, breathe. He's supposed to be dead, she whispered. I thought the fire... Understanding dawned in Elias's eyes. Your brother-in-law? She nodded, unable to speak past the terror clawing at her throat. Silas alive meant questions, meant the past she'd tried so hard to bury rising up like smoke. Thank you, Tommy. Elias said calmly. Tell your mother we appreciate the warning, and tell her... He paused, his jaw set. Tell her we'll handle it. The boy nodded and spurred his horse back toward town. Elias turned the wagon toward home, his movements controlled but urgent. Tell me about Silas, he said quietly. Clara forced herself to breathe, to think. Sam's younger brother, a drifter, a gambler. He'd show up every few months, usually in trouble, always needing money. Sam could never say no to him. Was he there the night of the fire? He'd arrived that afternoon, dead broke again, running from debts. He and Sam were drinking in the barn. She stopped, the memories threatening to overwhelm her. I thought he died with them. I never saw him after the fire started. But you never saw a body? There wasn't much left to see. The words came out bitter. Just ash and char and... She couldn't finish. Elias reached over and took her hand, holding it firmly. We'll face this together. Whatever he wants, whatever he's after, he won't hurt you. I promise you that. They made it home without seeing another soul. Elias helped her down, his hands lingering on her waist. Go inside. Lock the doors. I'm going to put the wagon up and check the property. Elias. I won't go far. Just need to make sure he didn't follow us. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. Trust me. Always. Inside. Clara moved through the familiar rooms, checking windows, building up the fire though the day was warm. Her hands shook as she put coffee on to brew. Silas, alive. After all this time, after all the guilt she'd carried thinking she'd let him die too. When Elias came back, he found her standing at the window, watching the road. No sign of him, he reported. But he'll come. Men like that always do. He'll want money, Clara said dully. He always wants money, and if I don't give it to him... She turned to face Elias. He'll make trouble. He'll tell people things, twist the truth until... Until what? Elias crossed to her, taking her shoulders gently. What could he possibly say that would matter to me? That I let them die. That I could have saved them, but chose to save myself instead. Is that what happened? I don't know. The words burst out of her. I've replayed that night 1,000 times. Could I have gotten to the barn sooner? Could I have stopped them from drinking? Could I have— Stop. His voice was firm but kind. You're torturing yourself with questions that have no answers. Whatever happened that night, I know who you are now. That's all that matters to me. She collapsed against him, letting him hold her while she shook. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of blood and fire. Somewhere out there, Silas was coming, bringing the past with him like a plague. What do we do? She whispered. We wait, Elias said. We see what he wants, and then we deal with it. His arms tightened around her. But Clara, hear me on this. No matter what he says or does, you're not facing it alone. We stand together or not at all. She nodded against his chest, drawing strength from his certainty. Whatever came next, she wouldn't run. She'd found something worth fighting for here, and she'd be damned if she'd let Silas Monroe take it from her, as if reading her thoughts. Elias pulled back to look at her. Whatever he thinks he knows, whatever hold he thinks he has over you, he's about to learn different. You're not the same woman who fled Nebraska, and you're surely not alone anymore. No, Clara agreed, finding steel in her spine. I'm not. They stood together as darkness fell, waiting for the past to arrive at their door. But for the first time since seeing Tommy Martinez racing toward them, Clara felt something besides fear. She felt ready. Let Silas come. She had survived fire and loss and grief. She had found love again when she thought her heart was ash. Whatever price the past demanded, she would pay it, but she would not let it steal her future. Not again. Silas Monroe arrived 3 days later, just as the sun reached its zenith. Clara saw him first from the kitchen window, a figure on horseback, moving with the lazy confidence of a man who believed he held all the cards, even from a distance. She recognized the theatrical way he sat his horse, the expensive but travel-worn clothes, the gambler's affectation of checking his pocket watch as if time bent to his will. He's here, she said quietly. Elias rose from the table where he'd been mending a bridle, his movements calm and deliberate. He'd been preparing for this. She knew, cleaning his rifle, checking the loads in his Colt, positioning himself where he could watch all approaches to the ranch. Now he simply nodded and moved to stand beside her at the window. Alone. Appears to be. Good. Stay inside. Clara, let me— No. She turned to face him. He's here for me. I won't hide behind you like a child. Elias studied her face, then nodded slowly. Together, then— But I do the talking first. They stepped onto the porch as Silas dismounted with a flourish. Up close, Clara could see the marks of hard living, the dissipated look around his eyes, the tremor in his hands that spoke of too much whiskey, the shabby edges of his supposedly fine clothes. But his smile was the same, charming and false as fool's gold. Well, well, Clara, dear sister, aren't you a sight for sore eyes? His gaze slid to Elias. And you must be the fortunate Mr. Hartley. I've heard so much about you in town, the grieving widower who's found solace in my dear sister-in-law's arms. State your business, Elias said flatly. Silas's smile widened. Direct. I like that. Very well. I'm here to collect what's mine. You see, when my dear brother died, he left certain debts, obligations that, as his widow, Clara inherited. Sam left nothing but ashes, Clara said, finding her voice. You know that as well as I do. Ah, but that's where you're wrong. Dear sister. Silas produced a folded paper from his jacket with a magician's timing. Before his unfortunate demise, Sam signed a promissory note, $5,000, borrowed from some rather insistent gentlemen in Kansas City, gentlemen who are very eager to collect. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. That's impossible. Sam never told you. Silas tisked. How like him, always trying to protect you from the harsh realities. But I have the paper right here, witnessed and legal, and as his widow. Let me see it, Elias interrupted. Silas hesitated, then handed over the document. Elias studied it carefully while Clara watched his face. trying to read his expression. "This is dated 2 weeks before the fire," Elias observed. "Convenient timing." "Nothing convenient about debt. Mr. Hartley, those gentlemen in Kansas City, they don't care about timing. They just want their money. With interest. It's now closer to 7,000. "Even if this is real," Clara said, "I have nothing. You know that. Silas, everything was lost in the fire." "Yes, about that fire." Silas's eyes glittered. "Such a tragedy. Sam drinking himself stupid, knocking over that lantern, and poor little Anna playing in the hay." He shook his head with theatrical sorrow. "If only someone could have saved them." Clara flinched as if struck. Beside her, Elias went very still. "But you tried, didn't you, Clara?" Silas continued, his voice silky. "Tried so hard. I saw you, saw you run from the house, saw you stop at the barn door, saw you hesitate." "I didn't," Clara's voice broke. "Didn't what? Didn't pause just a moment too long? Didn't think about what life might be like without a drunk for a husband? Without a child tying you down?" "That's enough," Elias said, stepping forward. But Silas wasn't finished. "I was in the loft too. With Anna. Sweet little thing. Always following her Uncle Silas around. When the fire started, I tried to get to her, but the smoke, I barely made it out alive. Crawled out the back, half dead. By the time I came to, the whole place was ash. Everyone thought I'd died too, and I let them think it. Seemed easier than explaining why I survived when a child didn't." Clara was shaking now. Elias's hand on her arm, the only thing keeping her upright. "But you, Clara," Silas went on relentlessly. "You were right there, right at the door. You could have—" "She could have died," Elias interrupted, his voice dangerous. "She could have burned with them, and what good would that have done?" Silas shrugged. "I'm just saying how it might look to others. A woman who inherits her husband's debts but claims to have no money. A woman who was seen hesitating while her family burned. A woman now living in sin with another man." He spread his hands. "People talk, especially when encouraged." "What do you want?" Clara asked dully. "Well, there's what the gentlemen in Kansas City want, $7,000, and there's what I want for my discretion. Shall we say another 3,000? 10,000 total seems fair for a new start." "We don't have that kind of money." Elias said, "No, this is good land. Cattle, horses, water rights. I'm sure you could raise it, or—" Silas's smile turned predatory. "Clara could come with me. I know some establishments in San Francisco always looking for attractive widows. She could work off the debt in, 5 or 6 years." Elias moved so fast, Silas didn't have time to react. One moment the gambler was smiling his oily smile. The next, he was on the ground. Elias's hand around his throat. "You listen to me very carefully," Elias said, his voice deadly calm. "You're going to get on your horse and ride out of here. You're going to forget you ever knew Clara. You're going to forget this ranch exists. Because if I see you again, if you so much as whisper her name in a saloon, I'll kill you. Not threaten, not warn. Kill. And unlike you, I keep my promises." He released Silas, who scrambled backward, coughing. "You can't. That's assault. I'll have the law." "Try it," Elias said. "I've got friends in the territorial government, men I served with, men who owe me favors." "You think they'll take the word of a two-bit gambler over mine?" Silas struggled to his feet, his false charm cracking to show the desperate man beneath. "That paper is legal. She owes—" "This," Elias held up the promissory note. "This is going in the fire, and you're going to watch it burn." He strode to the house, returning with a lit lantern. Without ceremony, he touched the flame to the paper. They all watched it curl and blacken, floating away on the desert wind. "You can't do this," Silas spluttered. "Those men in Kansas City are your problem, not ours," Clara said, finding strength in Elias's certainty. "Just like they always were. That was never Sam's debt, was it? It was yours. You just figured out a way to try and collect twice." Silas's face twisted. "You always were too smart for your own good. Sam said, I don't care what Sam said." Clara stepped forward, and Silas actually backed away. Sam is dead. Anna is dead. And I've spent 2 years wishing I'd died with them. But I didn't. I lived, and I'm going to keep living. Without you, without the past, without the guilt you're trying to heap on me. You let them die, Silas hissed. You stood there and... I stood there for maybe 3 seconds, Clara said, her voice steady now. 3 seconds of shock, of disbelief, of pure human terror. Then I ran in anyway. I searched through smoke so thick I couldn't see my own hands. I called their names until my throat bled. I have the scars to prove it. She touched her chest. So don't you dare stand there and tell me I let them die. Don't you dare. Silas looked between them, Clara standing straight and proud, Elias solid and immovable beside her. Something in the gambler's face crumbled. I need money, he said, the bravado gone. I owe people, bad people. If I don't pay, not our problem. Elias said coldly, You've got a horse and a head start. I suggest you use both. Clara, please. For Sam's sake, Sam is beyond helping, and you were never anything but a burden to him. Clara's voice was tired now, drained. Go, Silas. Go and don't come back. Let the living bury the dead. Silas stood there a moment longer, a broken man playing his last card and losing. Then he turned and stumbled to his horse. As he mounted, he looked back one more time. I loved her too, you know, Anna. I would have saved her if I could. I know, Clara said softly. That's the only reason you're riding away alive. They watched him go, his figure growing smaller against the vast landscape until he was just another speck of dust on the horizon. Only then did Clara allow herself to sag against Elias. It's over, she whispered. That part is. He agreed, wrapping his arms around her. But Clara, what he said about the fire, about you hesitating, was true. She pulled back to look at him. I did hesitate. For just a moment. I stood there frozen. Maybe if I hadn't, you would have died with them, Elias said firmly. 3 seconds, 10 seconds. It wouldn't have mattered. Fire doesn't wait for courage to catch up with shock. How can you be so sure? Because I've seen men in battle freeze for longer when cannonballs were flying. Because I've seen good people hesitate before jumping into flooding rivers to save others. Because you're human. Clara, and humans need a moment to process horror before they can act. The miracle is that you acted at all. She leaned into him, letting his certainty wash over her. Do you think he'll stay gone? I think he's more afraid of his creditors than he is of us. He'll run far and fast. Men like Silas always do. They stood together on the porch, watching the empty horizon. The crisis had passed, but Clara felt strange, lighter somehow, as if a weight she hadn't known she was carrying had been lifted. I thought seeing him would destroy me, she admitted. Thought all the guilt would come flooding back, and it did, for a moment, but then you fought back, told the truth, refused to let him define your story. We fought back, she corrected. I couldn't have done it alone. You're stronger than you know. Clara Monroe. But I'm glad you didn't have to find out alone. She turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face. Monroe was Sam's name. I think I'm ready to let it go. When Reverend Blake comes. Clara Hartley, he said softly, testing the sound. I like it. So do I. She stood on her toes to kiss him, tasting promise and freedom and future on his lips. So do I, as they went back inside, leaving the ghosts outside in the fading light. Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in years, not just peace. She'd found moments of that with Elias already. This was different. This was release. The past had come calling, and she'd faced it down. The guilt might never fully leave, but it no longer owned her. She was free to love without looking backward, free to build without fear of fire, free to be Clara Hartley when the time came. And all that name would mean? In the kitchen. She began preparing supper with steady hands. Elias sat at the table, watching her with those gray eyes that saw everything and judged nothing. This was her life now, simple, quiet, shared with a man who understood that love after loss was not betrayal, but courage. Outside, the desert wind erased Silas's tracks, as if he'd never been there at all. And in the warmth of her kitchen, Clara began to believe that might actually be true. The past had no power here, only the present moment, and all the moments to come. The letter arrived 2 weeks after Silas's visit, delivered by a nervous young rider who wouldn't meet Clara's eyes. She knew before opening it that it meant trouble. Good news never came with such haste and secrecy. "Elias," she called, her voice steady despite the dread pooling in her stomach. He emerged from the barn, took one look at her face and the letter in her hands, and crossed to her in quick strides. Together they read Silas's desperate scrawl. "Clara, they have me, the Kansas City men. If you don't come with $5,000 by week's end, they'll kill me. I'm at Garrison's trading post, 40 miles north. Please, I know I have no right to ask, but you're my only hope. For Sam's memory. For Anna." Clara let the letter fall from numb fingers. "He's using them again. Sam and Anna. Even now. He's using them." "It could be a trap," Elias said carefully. "Another scheme." "No." Clara recognized the shaky handwriting, could see where tears or sweat had smudged the ink. He's truly desperate this time. They stood in silence, the weight of decision pressing down. Clara knew what Elias was thinking, that Silas had made his choices, that they owed him nothing, that riding into unknown danger for a man who'd tried to blackmail them was foolishness. All true, and yet, "I can't let him die," Clara said quietly. "Not when I could help. Not again." Elias studied her face. "This isn't the same as the fire. Clara, this is Silas's own making." "I know. But if I do nothing, if I let him die when I could have acted," she touched the place where her scars lay hidden. "I've carried enough guilt. I won't add more." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "We don't have $5,000. We have $3,000 saved. The money for the new barn, the cattle. Our future. What kind of future would it be, knowing I could have saved someone and chose not to?" Clara met his eyes. "I'm not asking you to come. This is my burden." "The hell it is." His voice was sharp. "You think I'd let you ride into danger alone? If we do this, we do it together." Relief flooded through her. "You understand? I understand that the woman I love needs to do this to find peace. That's enough for me." He pulled her close. "But Clara, we go prepared. This could go bad a dozen different ways." They spent the rest of the day making ready. Elias cleaned and loaded weapons, mapped the route to Garrison's trading post, packed supplies for hard riding. Clara gathered the money, bills hidden in various places, coins hoarded against emergencies, even her mother's silver brush, which Elias insisted could be sold if needed. 3,400? She counted. "It's not enough. It'll have to be. Maybe we can negotiate." That night, they held each other in the dark, not speaking of the danger ahead. Clara traced the old bullet scars on Elias's back, remnants of his war, while he pressed kisses to her hair. They'd only just found each other. The thought of losing him now was unbearable. "Promise me," she whispered. "If something happens, if you have to choose between me and—" "Don't." He silenced her with a kiss. "We both come home. That's the only promise I'm making." They left before dawn, riding hard across the desert landscape. 40 miles was a day's journey at a normal pace, but they pushed their horses, driven by the deadline in Silas's letter. The sun climbed mercilessly, baking the earth and sending up shimmers of heat that made the distant mesas dance. Garrison's trading post squatted at a crossroads like a bloated spider, drawing in travelers and their money. It was a rough place, part store, part saloon, part hotel for those brave or foolish enough to sleep there. Exactly the sort of place where desperate men made desperate deals. "We go in careful," Elias instructed as they approached. "Stay close to me. Don't show the money until we have to." The interior was dim and stifling, thick with tobacco smoke and unwashed bodies. Clara spotted Silas immediately. He sat at a corner table, flanked by 2 men who looked like they'd been carved from granite and meanness. Silas's face was bruised, one eye swollen shut. When he saw Clara, something like hope flickered in his good eye. "Clara, you came. I knew you would." "Shut up, Monroe." The larger of the two men backhanded Silas casually, then turned his attention to Clara and Elias. Well, the sister-in-law, beginning to think you weren't real." "I'm real enough," Clara said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. "And I'm here to settle my brother's debt." The man, who could only be one of the Kansas City creditors, smiled unpleasantly. "Good. You brought the money? $7,000? The letter said 5,000. Elias interjected. "That was before we had to chase this weasel halfway across the territory. Expenses add up." "We have $3,400. Clara said, "It's all we could raise." The silence that followed was dangerous. Around them, other patrons carefully avoided looking their way, sensing violence in the air. 3,000, the creditor repeated slowly. "That's not even half what's owed. It's what we have." Clara said simply, "Take it and let him go, or get nothing. Your choice." The man exchanged glances with his partner. "Or we could take the money and the woman. Pretty thing like you would fetch good prices in certain establishments." Elias's hand moved to his gun, but Clara touched his arm, stilling him. "Try it," she said calmly. "But you should know my husband is Elias Hartley, war hero, friend to the territorial governor. You harm us, and you'll have more law on you than you can bribe your way out of." It was partly bluff. Elias did know men in government, but whether they'd intervene was questionable. Still, the Kansas City men looked uncertain. They were used to dealing with frontier drifters, not established ranchers with connections. 4,000, the smaller one said suddenly. 4,000, and we call it square. "We don't have," Clara began. "Your wedding ring." The man pointed. "That brush sticking out of your bag. Whatever else you got, 4,000 in cash and goods, or we take it out of Monroe's hide, permanent-like." Clara looked at Silas, really looked at him. Saw not the charming rogue who'd plagued their lives, but a broken man who'd run out of schemes and second chances. She thought of Sam, how he'd loved his brother despite everything. Thought of Anna, who'd adored her Uncle Silas. Slowly, she pulled off her wedding ring, not the new one Elias had given her, but Sam's ring, which she still wore on her right hand, added her mother's brush, a cameo brooch, even the gold buttons from Elias's spare vest. 4,000. The creditor counted with satisfaction. "Pleasure doing business." They shoved Silas forward so roughly he stumbled. Clara caught his arm, steadying him. Up close, she could see he'd been beaten badly, maybe tortured. Whatever swagger he'd had was gone, replaced by hollow-eyed exhaustion. "Get him out of here," the creditor advised. "We see him again. No amount of money will save him." They half-carried Silas to their horses. He could barely sit upright, so Elias tied him to Clara's saddle and led both horses while Clara kept Silas from falling. They rode hard, not stopping until they'd put miles between them and Garrison's. Finally, as the sun began to set, they made camp in a box canyon. Elias built a small fire while Clara tended Silas's wounds. He was in bad shape, ribs cracked, cuts infected, spirit broken. "Why?" he whispered through split lips. "Why save me after everything?" Clara wrung out a cloth in cool water, gently cleaning dried blood from his face. "Because that's what family does, even family we don't particularly like." "Sam would have let me rot." "No," Clara said firmly. "Sam would have done exactly what we did, complained the whole time. Maybe, but he'd have come." Silas closed his eyes, tears leaking from the corners. "I'm sorry. About the fire, about trying to blackmail you, about everything. I know." And, surprisingly, she found she meant it. The anger was gone, replaced by weary pity for this man who'd never learned to stand on his own feet. Elias returned with rabbits for dinner, as they ate in silence. Silas finally asked, "What happens now?" "Now you disappear," Elias said bluntly. "Change your name. Head east or west. I don't care, but you stay gone. This was your last chance." Monroe, there won't be another. I understand. Silas struggled to sit straighter. I'll go to California. Always wanted to see the ocean. Maybe I can start over, do better. Maybe, Clara said, though they all knew the odds. Men like Silas rarely changed. But she'd given him the chance. And that's what mattered. Her conscience was clear. They reached the ranch the next evening, exhausted and considerably poorer, as they unsaddled the horses. Clara felt Elias watching her. Regrets? He asked. She considered. They'd lost their savings, risked their lives, all for a man who'd caused them nothing but trouble. And yet, no, she said finally. No regrets. I needed to do that, to choose to save someone, even someone who didn't deserve it. It doesn't erase the past, but somehow it balances things. He came to her, pulling her into his arms. You're a better person than most. Clara, soon to be Hartley. I'm just someone trying to live with myself, she corrected. And I can do that now, thanks to you. They watched Silas ride away the next morning, a ghost finally exorcised. He looked back once, raised his hand in farewell or blessing, then disappeared over the ridge. Think we'll see him again? Clara asked. No, Elias said with certainty. He knows what he owes us now. Men like Silas understand debts. He'll stay gone. Clara leaned against her soon-to-be husband, feeling strangely empty but also complete. The past had demanded its final payment, and she'd paid it. Now there was only the future, the wedding next week, the ranch to rebuild, the life they'd create together. Come on, Elias said, pressing a kiss to her temple. Let's go home. We've got a barn to not build, thanks to your generous heart. We'll build it eventually. Clara said, Together, he agreed. They walked back to the house hand in hand, leaving no ghosts behind them. The morning sun painted the desert in shades of gold and promise, and for the first time in years, Clara felt truly free. She'd saved Silas not for his sake, but for her own, to prove she could act when it mattered, could choose compassion over safety. The nightmares might still come sometimes. The scars would always remain. But she'd faced down her demons and found them smaller than she'd feared. And in 7 days, she'd stand before Reverend Blake and become Clara Hartley, a woman with a future as wide and bright as the desert sky. It had cost them everything they'd saved. It had been worth every penny. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the desert air crisp with the promise of autumn. Clara stood before the small mirror in what was now truly her room, pinning up her hair with careful fingers. She wore her good dress, not white, for she was no virgin bride, but a soft dove gray that Elias said brought out her eyes. Rosa Martinez bustled about, having arrived early to help with preparations. Such a beautiful day for a wedding. Mia, the desert smiles on your union. Through the window, Clara could see Elias setting up chairs in the yard, helped by Juan Martinez and a few other neighbors who'd made the journey. It would be a small ceremony, nothing like her first wedding with its church full of people and elaborate reception. This was better, she thought. Truer. You're thinking of him, Rosa said gently, reading Clara's face. Your first husband. Is that wrong, to think of Sam today? Wrong. No, querida. You loved him. He was part of your journey to this moment. But today is about the future, not the past. Clara nodded, touching the simple gold band Elias had given her, purchased with some of their remaining money after losing her rings to Silas's creditors. It wasn't fancy, but it was real, solid, like the man who'd given it to her. There, Rosa said, stepping back. Beautiful. Elias is a lucky man. Clara smiled. I'm the lucky one. Outside, she heard the sound of an approaching wagon. Reverend Blake had arrived, his familiar figure climbing down with practiced ease. He was a traveling minister, serving the scattered communities of the territory, and his visits were always cause for gathering. A knock at the door made her turn. Come in. But it wasn't Elias or Rosa's husband. It was young Mrs. Henderson from town, twisting her hands nervously. Mrs. Miss Clara, I wanted to apologize for what I said in the store that day. It was unchristian of me, and I'm sorry." Clara blinked in surprise. "Mrs. Henderson, I didn't expect. My husband's mother was a widow when she married his father." The younger woman continued in a rush. "She faced the same whispers, the same judgment. I should have known better. I hope you can forgive me." "Of course," Clara said, touched by the unexpected apology. "We all say things we regret." Mrs. Henderson smiled tremulously. "I brought this, a wedding gift." She held out a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a delicate lace handkerchief, beautifully embroidered with tiny flowers. "It's lovely," Clara said sincerely. "Thank you. Be happy." Mrs. Henderson said, "You deserve it. Both of you do." After she left, Rosa smiled knowingly. "You see, even the hardest hearts can soften. This marriage is already bringing good changes." The ceremony was scheduled for late afternoon, when the brutal sun had gentled into golden hour. Clara spent the morning helping with preparations. There would be a meal afterward. Simple but generous, with everyone contributing something. The ranch felt alive with purpose and community in a way it hadn't since she'd arrived. She was arranging wildflowers on the makeshift altar when she felt eyes on her. Turning, she found Elias watching from the porch, already dressed in his best clothes, a black jacket she'd never seen before, his boots polished to a shine. "You're not supposed to see the bride before the wedding," she called out. Teasing. "That's for first marriages," he replied, coming closer. "We're making our own rules, remember?" He stopped just short of touching her, his gray eyes warm with something that made her breath catch. "You're beautiful." "Clara." "Elias." She felt heat rise in her cheeks. "People will see." "Let them." But he stepped back, propriety winning for the moment. "I have something for you, a wedding gift." He led her to the barn, where Rosalie stood in her stall. But the mare wasn't alone. Beside her stood a young paint filly, all knobby legs and curious eyes. "She's Rosalie's daughter," Elias explained. "Born this spring at the Martinez Ranch. I've been keeping it a surprise." Clara's eyes filled. "She's perfect, but Elias, we can't afford." "Already paid for, months ago, before." He gestured, encompassing all that had happened with Silas. "I wanted you to have something that was yours, a new beginning." She threw propriety to the wind and kissed him, right there in the barn with the horses looking on. "Thank you," she whispered against his lips. "For everything." "Save that gratitude for tonight," he murmured back, making her blush furiously. "Elias Hartley, we're not even married yet." 3 more hours, he said, grinning in a way that transformed his usually serious face. "I've been counting." The afternoon seemed to fly and crawl simultaneously. Clara found herself checking the small clock repeatedly, her nerves building. Not from doubt, she'd never been more certain of anything, but from the magnitude of it. She was choosing to trust again, to build again, to risk her heart again. Finally, Rosa declared it time. The guests were assembled in the yard, the reverend in place. The sun was just beginning its descent, painting everything in warm gold. "Ready, mija?" Rosa asked. Clara took a deep breath. "Ready?" The walk from the house to where Elias waited seemed both endless and far too short. She was aware of the faces turning to watch. Some she knew, some strangers who'd come for the reverend's circuit. But mostly she was aware of Elias, standing tall and steady, his eyes never leaving hers. When she reached him, he took her hands, and she felt the slight tremor in his fingers. So he was nervous too. That made her smile. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Blake began, his voice carrying across the desert silence. "We gather today to witness the union of Elias and Clara, 2 souls who have walked through darkness and found light in each other." The words washed over her, familiar yet different from her first wedding. Then, she'd been a girl playing at being a woman, in love with the love itself. Now she stood as someone who knew the cost of love, the weight of loss, and chose to love anyway. The book of Ecclesiastes tells us there is a time for everything under heaven, the Reverend continued. A time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to tear down and a time to build. These two have known the tearing down. Today, they begin to build. Clara felt tears slip down her cheeks and didn't try to stop them. Beside her, Elias squeezed her hands gently. Elias, will you have this woman as your wedded wife? Will you love her, comfort her, honor and keep her, in sickness and in health, forsaking all others, so long as you both shall live? I will. His voice was steady. Certain. Clara, will you have this man as your wedded husband? Will you love him, comfort him, honor and keep him, in sickness and in health, forsaking all others, so long as you both shall live? I will. The words came from her heart, her soul, every part of her that had healed and grown in this desert place. The rings, please. Juan Martinez's young son stepped forward importantly, carrying the simple gold bands on a small pillow Rosa had embroidered. These rings are circles, without beginning or end, Reverend Blake said as Elias slipped the ring onto Clara's finger, like the love they represent, eternal and unbroken. Clara's hands shook slightly as she placed Elias's ring, but his smile steadied her. This was right. This was home. By the power vested in me by the territory of New Mexico and by God above, I now pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no one tear asunder. The Reverend smiled. Elias, you may kiss your bride. The kiss was gentle, appropriate for public viewing, but Clara felt the promise in it, of passion held in check, of nights to come, of a lifetime of such kisses. The assembled guests erupted in cheers and applause. Mrs. Hartley, Elias murmured against her ear as they turned to face their community. How does it feel? Like coming home, she answered, and meant it. The celebration that followed was simple but joyful. Tables groaned under the weight of contributed dishes. Rosa's tamales, Mrs. Henderson's apple pie, fresh bread from other neighbors. Someone produced a fiddle, and soon couples were dancing on the packed earth, lit by lanterns as the stars emerged. Clara found herself passed from partner to partner, everyone wanting to wish the bride well, but her eyes kept finding Elias, whether he was deep in conversation with Juan about cattle prices or helping serve food to the children. Her husband. The word still felt new, precious. As the evening wore on, she noticed him saying something to Rosa, who nodded and began gently encouraging guests to prepare for departure. Soon, wagons were being loaded, children gathered, farewells exchanged. Thank you all for coming, Clara said as people began to leave. It meant the world to us. Be happy, Mija, Rosa said, embracing her. You've earned it. Finally, blessedly, they were alone. The night had fully arrived, crickets singing their ancient songs. Clara began gathering plates, but Elias caught her hand. Leave it, he said. We have the rest of our lives for chores. He led her not to the house, but to the stream that ran behind the property, swollen with recent rains. The moon had risen, full and bright, turning the water to liquid silver. Someone, Rosa, probably, had laid out a blanket on the soft grass, left a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. Did you plan this? Clara asked, charmed. I might have mentioned to Rosa that we'd want some time alone. He poured wine, handed her a glass. To new beginnings, Mrs. Hartley. To second chances, she corrected, touching her glass to his. They sat together on the blanket, the wine sweet on their tongues, the night air soft around them. Clara leaned against her husband, and felt peace settle into her bones. No regrets? Elias asked, echoing his question from days before. Not one, she assured him. You? Only that I didn't find you sooner. He set aside his glass, turned to face her fully. Clara, I want you to know, tonight, we go at your pace. There's no rush. We have... She silenced him with a kiss, deep and sure. Elias, she said when they broke apart. I've been a widow for 2 years. I know what I want, and what I want is my husband. His eyes darkened. "Clara." She stood, holding out her hand. "Take me home. Elias, take me to our bed." He rose, pulled her against him for another kiss that left her breathless. Then he swept her up in his arms, making her laugh with surprise. "I can walk. Humor me," he said, carrying her toward the house. "I've been thinking about this for months." Inside, candles had been lit. Rosa again. Bless her. The bedroom, their bedroom, glowed with soft light. Elias set her down gently, his hands framing her face. "I love you," he said simply. "I'll spend every day showing you how much." "And I love you," she replied. "My second first love, my last love." What followed was a discovery, gentle and passionate by turns. Two people who'd known loss learning the landscape of new love. His hands were reverent on her skin, tracing scars both visible and hidden. Her touches brought sounds from him she'd never heard, vulnerable and beautiful. When they lay entwined afterward, moonlight painting their bodies silver. Clara traced patterns on his chest. "Was it worth the wait?" "Worth everything," he said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Though if I'd known it would be like that, I might not have been so patient." She laughed, feeling young and alive. "Patience is a virtue, Mr. Hartley. So is passion, Mrs. Hartley." He pulled her closer. "And I plan to be very virtuous." They made love again as the night deepened. Slower this time, learning each other's rhythms. When exhaustion finally claimed them, they slept deeply. No ghosts between them. Clara woke at dawn to find Elias watching her, his face soft with wonder. "Good morning, husband," she said, stretching luxuriously. "Good morning, wife." He caught her hand, kissed her palm. "Ready to start our life together?" "We already have," she pointed out. "But yes, ready for all of it. The work, the quiet evenings, the storms, the sunshine, all of it. As long as it's with you." "Forever," he promised. "Or as long as we get." "That's enough," Clara said, meaning it. "However long we get, it's enough." They rose together to face their first full day as husband and wife. Partners in every sense. Outside, the desert was already warming, promising another scorching day, but inside their home, all was coolness and peace. Love finally triumphant over loss. 5 years had passed since their wedding day, and the Hartley Ranch had flourished under their combined care. The small vegetable garden had expanded into neat rows that defied the desert's harsh nature. A new barn stood where they'd planned it, built slowly with their own hands and occasional help from neighbors. The chicken coop Elias had promised was now home to a dozen hens that, true to his prediction, seemed to take particular delight in chasing him across the yard while Clara laughed from the porch. On this particular morning, Clara stood at that same porch, one hand pressed to her lower back, the other shading her eyes as she watched Elias working with the horses. At 32, he moved with the same easy grace that had first caught her attention, though silver now threaded more liberally through his dark hair. The sight of him still made her heart quicken, especially now, carrying their child. The pregnancy had been a surprise, a blessing neither had dared hope for after years of trying. When Doc Harmon had confirmed her suspicions 3 months ago, Clara had cried while Elias held her, his own eyes suspiciously wet. Now, with spring arriving and her belly rounding, the miracle felt more real each day. "You shouldn't be standing so long," Elias called out, leading Rosalie's daughter, now a fine young mare Clara had named Hope, toward the water trough. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass." Clara replied, though she did ease herself into the rocking chair he'd built for her last month. He tied off Hope and crossed to her, dropping a kiss on her forehead before kneeling to press his ear against her belly. It had become his morning ritual, listening for movement, talking to their unborn child. "Good morning, little one," he murmured. "Your mama's being stubborn again. You'll have to talk sense into her when you arrive." "Or she," Clara corrected, running her fingers through his hair. "Could be a daughter. Boy or girl. They'll be perfect." He looked up at her, and she saw in his eyes the same wonder that had been there since she'd told him. "How are you feeling? Any more of those pains?" "Just the usual aches. Doc Harmon said it's normal." She'd been having occasional cramping. Nothing severe, but Elias worried. Given both their histories, she couldn't blame him. A dust cloud on the horizon caught their attention. Riders approaching, moving fast. Elias rose, his hand moving automatically to his hip where his gun would normally rest, though he didn't wear it around the ranch anymore. But as the riders drew closer, Clara recognized the lead horse. It's Juan Martinez, and he's riding hard. Something was wrong. Juan wouldn't push his horse like that without reason. Elias helped Clara to her feet, and they waited as Juan and two other men thundered into the yard. "Elias, thank God you're here." Juan swung down from his lathered horse. "There's been trouble at the Garrison place. Raiders hit them last night, burned the trading post, killed Garrison and his son." Clara's blood ran cold. The Garrison trading post, where they'd rescued Silas all those years ago. Raiders? Apache, some say. Others think it's Comancheros. Either way, they're moving south, hitting isolated places. Juan's eyes flicked to Clara's obvious condition. "We're gathering the men, riding out to track them. Make sure they don't come this way." "I'll get my gear," Elias said immediately. "No." Clara gripped his arm. "Elias, no!" He turned to her, his face torn. "Clara, you can't. Not now." She hated the desperation in her voice, but couldn't stop it. "Please." Juan cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Elias, if you need to stay, he's coming," Clara said, surprising everyone, including herself. "Of course he's coming. Just give us a moment." The men moved off to water their horses while Clara drew Elias aside. "I can't lose you," she whispered. "Not now. Not when we're finally. You won't lose me." He cupped her face in his hands. "I promise you, Clara, I'll come back. But I have to go. If those raiders come this way, if they find you here alone," his voice roughened, "I have to protect what's mine." She understood. Hated it, but understood. This was the price of living on the frontier. Sometimes men had to ride out to keep danger from riding in. "Be careful," she said. "Be so careful. And come back to us. Always." He kissed her deeply, then pressed his hand to her belly. "Take care of your mama, little one. I'll be back before you know it." He was gone within minutes, rifle in hand, supplies in saddlebags. Clara watched the group ride away until they were just specks against the horizon, then went inside to wait. Rosa Martinez arrived that afternoon, accompanied by several other women from neighboring ranches. "We stick together when the men ride out," she explained, settling into the kitchen like she belonged there. "You're not facing this alone, Mia." The next 3 days were the longest of Clara's life. The women took turns keeping watch, cooking, tending the animals. News trickled in. The raiders had been spotted moving west, away from their area. The men were in pursuit. No casualties among the posse yet. On the third night, Clara couldn't sleep. The baby was restless, turning and kicking. She paced the bedroom, pausing occasionally to look out the window at the empty horizon. The other women were asleep in various rooms, but Clara felt utterly alone. A sound made her freeze. Horses approaching. Many horses. Her heart hammered as she grabbed Elias's spare rifle, checking the load with hands that barely trembled. If the raiders had doubled back. "Clara, it's me!" Elias's voice. Clara dropped the rifle and ran, as much as her condition allowed. She flung open the door to find him dismounting, dusty and exhausted but whole. "You're back," she breathed. "You're safe. I told you I would be." He caught her carefully, mindful of her belly. "It's over. We caught up with them near the border. They won't be troubling anyone again." "Was it Apache?" "Comancheros. Mexicans and Anglos mostly. Dressed to look like Apache to throw off pursuit." His face was grim. "Cowards and thieves, preying on decent folk." Clara didn't ask for details. She didn't need them. All that mattered was that he was home, safe, solid in her arms. The other women emerged, relief clear on their faces. They fussed over the returning men, providing food and coffee, but soon began gathering their things to leave. Dawn was breaking, and their own homes called. "You did well," Rosa said, embracing Clara. "You have the strength of a true frontier wife." After everyone left, Clara and Elias stood together on their porch, watching the sun rise over their land. The danger had passed, but it had reminded them both how precious and precarious their life was. "I was terrified," Clara admitted. "The whole time you were gone. So was I." Elias confessed. "Not of the raiders, of not coming back to you, of missing—" He gestured to her belly. "You won't miss anything," Clara assured him. "We've got at least another month, Doc Harmon says." Doc Harmon was wrong. Clara's labor began that very afternoon, swift and intense. The cramping she dismissed as normal suddenly became something far more powerful. "It's too early," she gasped, gripping Elias's hand as another wave hit. "Not too early," he said, though she could see fear in his eyes. "You're past 7 months. The baby will be fine. You'll both be fine." He sent word to Rosa, who arrived with the midwife within the hour. The women took charge, banishing Elias to the porch despite his protests. "This is women's work," Rosa said firmly. "Go, pace, pray. We'll call you when it's time." The labor was hard but mercifully quick. Clara had been afraid of the pain, afraid of what could go wrong, afraid of losing another child. But her body knew what to do, and the women around her were steady and sure. As the sun set, painting the desert in shades of fire, Clara gave a final push and heard the most beautiful sound in the world, her baby's first cry. "A son," the midwife announced. "Small but strong. Listen to those lungs." Clara reached for him with shaking hands, and when they placed the tiny, perfect body on her chest, she felt her heart remake itself around this new love. He was indeed small, but his grip when he wrapped his fingers around hers was strong. His hair was dark, like Elias's, his chin already showing that stubborn set. "Elias," she called, "come meet your son." He was through the door before she finished speaking, his face a study in awe. When he saw them, Clara exhausted but radiant, their son perfect and whole, he actually staggered. "A son," he breathed. "We have a son. Would you like to hold him?" The women helped transfer the baby to Elias's arms. Clara had seen her husband gentle horses, tend wounded animals, cradle her through nightmares, but watching him hold their child for the first time was something entirely new. He looked terrified and reverent and fiercely protective all at once. "Hello, little man," he whispered. "I'm your papa. I've been waiting to meet you." The baby opened his eyes, gray like his father's, and seemed to study Elias's face with a solemn intensity. "What shall we name him?" Clara asked. They'd discussed names, of course, but nothing had felt quite right. Now, looking at their son, Clara knew. "Thomas," Elias said suddenly. "Thomas Samuel Hartley, after your father and your first husband? It's perfect," Clara interrupted, tears flowing freely. "Thomas Samuel, our Tom." The women quietly withdrew, leaving the new family alone. Elias sat carefully on the bed beside Clara, their son cradled between them. "He's so small," Elias marveled. "Were we right to bring a child into this world, with raiders and storms and all the dangers?" "We were right," Clara said firmly. "He'll grow up strong and free under these wide skies. He'll learn courage from his father and whatever wisdom I can offer from his mother. This land, this life, it's hard. Yes, but it's good too. The best," Elias agreed, kissing her temple. "Thank you, Clara, for him, for our life, for not giving up when giving up would have been easier." "Thank you," she countered, "for being patient with a stubborn widow, for seeing past my grief to who I could be, for giving me a second chance at love." Little Tom made a small sound, not quite a cry, more an announcement of presence. They both laughed, the sound mixing with the evening songs of the desert birds. "I think he's saying enough sentiment," Clara interpreted. "He's a practical baby. Gets that from his mother." Elias said, "The good looks, though, those are all me." Clara swatted him gently, then winced as her body reminded her what she'd just been through. Elias was immediately concerned, helping her adjust the pillows, bringing water, fussing until she caught his hand. "I'm fine," she assured him. "Sore and tired, but fine. We're both fine." "More than fine," he corrected, looking at their son. "Perfect." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell properly. Through the window, stars emerged one by one, diamonds scattered across velvet, the same stars Clara had watched in despair her first nights here, then in hope as she and Elias grew closer, were now witnesses to their joy. Tom slept in his father's arms, making tiny sounds that seemed to fill the whole house. Clara leaned against Elias's shoulder, exhausted but utterly content. "What are you thinking?" Elias asked softly. "That I'm glad," Clara said simply. "Glad I lived through the fire. Glad I came west. Glad I answered your advertisement, even though I wasn't looking for a husband. Glad for every hard mile that led me here, to this moment, with you and our son." "The good Lord works in mysterious ways," Elias murmured, "leading two broken people to each other, letting us build something whole from the pieces." "Not broken anymore," Clara corrected. "Mended, stronger at the mended places." "Like that Japanese pottery Rosa told us about. What did she call it? Kintsugi, where they mend breaks with gold." Clara smiled. "That's us, mended with gold." Tom stirred, and Elias transferred him carefully back to Clara for feeding, as their son nursed, making small, satisfied sounds. Clara felt a peace deeper than any she'd known. This was what she'd never dared dream of in those dark months after the fire. Not just survival, but thriving. Not just love, but family. Not just a second chance, but a whole new life. Rich and full and precious. "I love you," she told Elias, "both of you." "My men, and we love you," he replied. "Our Clara, our heart, our home." Outside, a coyote called to the moon, and somewhere in the distance, an owl answered. The desert lived and breathed around their little house, vast and wild and beautiful. Inside, a new family began their journey together, proof that even in the harshest landscape, love could bloom and flourish. They had survived loss and loneliness, danger and doubt. Now they would live, really live, in the land of second chances, where the past was truly past and the future stretched ahead like an open road under endless sky. Clara kissed her son's downy head, then reached for her husband's hand. Whatever tomorrow brought, drought or plenty, struggle or ease, they would face it together. A widow's heart had learned to love again. A grieving man had found new purpose, and in the cradle of the desert, witnessed by stars and sage, a new story began. It was, Clara thought as sleep finally claimed her, more than enough. It was everything. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope Clara and Elias's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine in the telling. Where are you listening from today? Please share in the comments below. I'd love to know where in the world these tales of the Old West are reaching. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Clara and Elias's story. Did their second chance at love inspire you? Let me know in the comments.